All right, so today we're diving into a story that I think a lot of people find fascinating.
Yeah.
Rise and fall of BlackBerry. And specifically, we want to kind of figure out how a company that was so dominant
Yeah.
could essentially vanish almost overnight, it seems like.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I think there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of research, articles,
Okay.
some analysis, even like kind of a breakdown of BlackBerry's strategy at different points in time.
Okay, that's great.
So to help us kind of navigate this whole thing, we've got you here, who is an expert in seeing the bigger picture and connecting all the dots.
I try my best.
So I guess to kick things off, one thing that I found super interesting is, even after the iPhone came out, BlackBerry kind of like doubled down on their business focus.
Right.
And that seems like a huge mistake in hindsight.
Big mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning, though. Like, how did BlackBerry become so dominant in the first place?
Well, I think, if we go back to the late 90s, early 2000s, BlackBerry was really synonymous with secure mobile communication.
Yeah.
They were really kind of the ones that invented the smartphone as we know it.
Yeah.
Their push email technology was absolutely groundbreaking.
Yeah, I remember that being a huge deal.
Huge.
Like, you could get emails in real time. It was amazing.
That's right. And for business professionals who are constantly on the go, that was, it was a game changer.
Yeah.
And because of that, they pretty much had a monopoly on the business market. Everybody wanted a BlackBerry.
Yeah, and their devices were like...
status symbols.
Yeah, like if you had a BlackBerry, you were like somebody,
Absolutely. And their security features were also top-notch, which appealed to both business and government users.
Yeah, so they really understood their niche at that time.
They did, yeah.
They weren't trying to be everything to everyone.
Right.
They were focused on this secure and efficient communication tool.
For a specific target audience,
Yeah.
which was business users.
And that worked?
And it worked incredibly well. And their organizational structure, very hierarchical,
Okay.
also really played to this strength, quick decision-making.
Got it.
Very efficient execution, all really focused on that business user.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But then 2007 comes along, and the iPhone completely changes the game.
It did, yeah.
Like, suddenly consumers are demanding smartphones.
Yeah.
But for entertainment, apps, this user-friendly experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the iPhone was just so different. It was sleek, intuitive.
Yeah.
It had this beautiful interface, a thriving app store.
Yeah. It felt like the future.
It did. It felt like the future.
And here's where things get interesting, right?
Yeah.
BlackBerry, even after the iPhone comes out, doubles down
Yes.
on their business approach.
And what was working, yeah.
Yeah, they're like, oh, the iPhone's a toy.
It's a fad.
Yeah.
It's not secure.
Yeah.
Business people will stick with us.
They thought their existing model would just continue to dominate.
Yeah, this is what we call strategic blindness.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So it's basically when you're so focused on your past successes, you fail to recognize the fundamental shifts that are happening in the market.
It's like you're so busy looking in the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
You don't see what's coming up ahead.
That's a great analogy. That's exactly what happened to BlackBerry.
It's like they were driving a horse and buggy while everyone else was switching to cars.
And the consequences were pretty dire.
Yeah, and they were fast too, right?
Oh, yeah. Between 2010 and 2013, BlackBerry's market share absolutely plummeted.
Wow.
They went from being the leader to a distant, also ran.
So let's rewind a little bit
Okay.
to those crucial years, 2007 to 2013.
Yeah.
What specifically went wrong? Like, what were the big missteps?
Well, first, there was the whole touchscreen thing.
Yeah.
The iPhone popularized that in 2007. People loved it.
Yeah, it was so intuitive.
And it took BlackBerry until 2010 to release a truly competitive touchscreen device. And even then, the software felt clunky compared to iOS and Android.
Yeah, I remember using a BlackBerry around that time.
Right.
And it felt like a step backward.
It was almost like they were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, you know?
Yeah.
Trying to force their old software onto this new touchscreen interface.
It just didn't work.
It didn't work well, yeah.
And then there's the app situation.
Oh, the apps, yeah.
iPhone launches in 2007 with this great app store.
That's right, and Google follows suit with Android.
BlackBerry's app store, on the other hand.
It was a ghost town.
Yeah, like there was nothing there.
They just completely failed to attract developers.
Recreate that ecosystem that Apple and Google had.
Exactly, yeah, and that was a major strategic blunder because apps were becoming the primary way people were interacting with their smartphones.
And BlackBerry just wasn't there.
They were absent from that whole revolution.
They missed the boat completely.
They did.
It's like they were stuck in this time warp.
Yeah, they were
clinging to their past success while the world was moving on without them.
And that brings us to another critical aspect of their downfall.
Okay.
Their organizational culture.
So that hierarchical structure that worked so well for them in the beginning.
Yes, it became their Achilles heel.
How so?
Well, while it had helped them achieve that efficiency and dominance early on,
Yeah.
it created a barrier when they needed to adapt.
Yeah.
The research suggests there was this deep resistance to new ideas within the company.
Wow. So they were almost like afraid of change?
They were afraid of change. They were afraid of risk.
It's almost like they were so used to being successful.
Right.
They didn't know how to handle not being successful.
Yeah, and they lost their ability to listen to the market.
To their customers?
To their customers, yeah.
So it wasn't just about products. It was a cultural issue.
Yeah, it was systemic. It permeated the entire company.
And ultimately, that's what led to their demise.
Along with those strategic missteps.
Yeah, the lagging product development.
All those things kind of combined.
It was like a perfect storm.
It really was a perfect storm for BlackBerry.
So BlackBerry missed the touchscreen, the app revolution.
That's right.
And they had this culture that was really resistant to change.
Yeah, resistant to change.
So how did all of this play out in the years that followed?
Well, that's a great question, and that's what we're going to dive into after the break.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've established that BlackBerry missed out on touch screens, apps.
Yeah.
Two huge trends.
Huge.
It wasn't just about missing those trends, though, right? It was also about not being able to adapt and innovate once it became clear that things were changing.
Exactly. They did try
to
catch up. Yeah, there's this interesting article that talks about their attempts to innovate.
Okay.
In 2013, they launched a new operating system called BlackBerry 10.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah, it was designed to be more modern, touch-friendly. They even had some cool features like the BlackBerry Hub. It put all your messages, notifications in one place.
So they did realize they needed to change.
They did eventually. The problem was it was just too little, too late.
Yeah, everyone had already moved on, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah. The operating system was decent, but it just couldn't compete with the app ecosystem.
And the sleekness of iOS and Android.
Exactly. Like, it had some innovative features, but it just wasn't enough to win back those customers who'd already jumped ship.
It's like they were trying to build a new car while the competition was already flying around in spaceships.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, they were so far behind at that point.
Yeah.
And their culture, that resistance to change, really held them back.
You keep mentioning this rigid culture.
Yes.
How did that actually play out, like within the company?
Well, one former executive mentioned that there was just this aversion to risk-taking.
Okay.
Like, any new idea was met with skepticism. And there was this reluctance to deviate from the formula that had worked in the past.
So even if someone had a brilliant idea...
It would have been tough to get it off the ground.
Really?
Yeah, that hierarchy, the risk-averse culture, it created a real bottleneck for innovation.
And that leads to another point, their innovation strategy.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah, how did that fall short?
Well, they were very inward-focused.
Okay.
They relied heavily on their internal R&D teams, and they were really reluctant to collaborate with outside partners.
That seems like a huge mistake, especially when you look at Apple and Google.
Exactly.
They built these massive app ecosystems by embracing outside developers.
Right. They basically crowdsourced innovation.
Yeah.
And BlackBerry just didn't do that.
Tried to do everything themselves.
And in such a fast-paced industry, that's just not sustainable.
It wasn't just about apps, though, right?
No, it was a broader issue with their whole approach to product development.
So they were too focused on just making small improvements.
Yeah, incremental improvements, instead of trying to create something truly groundbreaking.
Like they were trying to perfect the BlackBerry of yesterday.
Exactly.
Instead of envisioning the smartphone of tomorrow.
It's kind of tragic,
It is.
They had so much potential.
Yeah.
But they just couldn't break free from their past.
And this highlights such a crucial lesson for businesses.
What's that?
Innovation isn't a one-time thing.
Right.
It's a continuous process.
It has to be ongoing.
You can't just rest on your laurels, no matter how successful you've been.
Especially in tech.
Yeah.
Where things change so quickly.
Like if you're not constantly pushing the boundaries.
You're going to get left behind.
And that's exactly what happened to BlackBerry.
That's exactly what happened.
So we've got resistance to change.
Yep.
Limited approach to innovation. They didn't really understand the changing needs of consumers.
Right.
Anything else.
Well, we have to talk about execution.
Okay.
Even if they had made the right strategic decisions, their ability to actually execute those changes was really hampered.
by their structure and culture.
Exactly. They just weren't agile or flexible enough to respond quickly.
So even if they had wanted to become more consumer-focused
It would have been really difficult to actually make those changes happen.
because of their internal systems and processes?
That's right. Their decision-making was slow.
Yeah.
Product development cycles were too long.
They were like a giant ship trying to make a quick turn.
Yeah, impossible.
So their downfall wasn't just about making the wrong decisions.
No.
It was also about not being able to execute effectively.
Even if they had made different choices.
It's almost like they were stuck in this vicious cycle.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
The rigid culture made it hard to adapt, which led to more decline, which further reinforced that resistance to change.
It was a downward spiral.
And it's a lesson for any business, not just tech companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need the right strategy,
Yes.
but you also need the ability to execute on that strategy.
Yeah. And that means having the right people, the right processes.
This has been a really insightful look at BlackBerry's fall.
It has.
Before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to our listener.
Okay.
You came to us wanting to understand how BlackBerry went wrong
Mm-hmm.
and what lessons you could apply to your own business.
Right. So what are the key takeaways here?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's about the danger of complacency.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
BlackBerry was so successful for so long, they became blind to the need to change.
They got comfortable.
They paid the price for that.
They did. It's a reminder that no matter how successful you are,
You can't just sit back and relax.
you have to keep pushing, keep adapting.
And that leads to the second takeaway, strategic flexibility.
Okay.
BlackBerry was so attached to their old business model, they couldn't pivot when things shifted.
They couldn't let go,
They were stuck in their comfort zone.
even though it was shrinking fast.
So the lesson here is be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Yeah. Be open to new ideas.
Be prepared to make big changes
Sometimes you have to disrupt yourself.
before someone else does it for you.
Exactly.
And I think it's also crucial to build a culture of innovation.
Yeah, that's key.
BlackBerry's structure really stifled creativity.
It did. It made it so hard for them to adapt.
They were too focused on the past.
Not enough on the future.
So you need to create an environment where people feel comfortable taking risks,
Experimenting, yeah.
challenging the status quo.
You need that to stay ahead.
And finally, BlackBerry's story highlights the importance of execution.
Yeah.
Having a great strategy isn't enough.
Right.
You also have to be able to execute on it effectively.
And that means having the right people in place.
The right processes, the right systems.
Exactly. BlackBerry's structure and slow decision-making really hurt them.
Even when they did see the need to change.
It's like they knew what they needed to do.
But they just couldn't do it.
Exactly. They were stuck.
It's amazing how the story of one company
Yeah.
can hold so many valuable lessons for all of us.
It really is. And I think there's still more to learn from BlackBerry.
Okay.
So let's continue our deep dive after a quick break.
Sounds good. So we've been talking about how BlackBerry missed out on these huge trends and how their culture really held them back.
Yeah.
One thing that really strikes me is that it wasn't like a sudden collapse.
Yeah.
It was this slow decline, almost like death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly. It was a series of missed opportunities, missteps.
They just kind of piled up over time.
And when you add them all together, it created this perfect storm.
They couldn't see the market changing.
They were slow to adapt to new technologies.
And their culture made it almost impossible to innovate.
It was a recipe for disaster.
And even when they tried to change, like with BlackBerry 10,
Yeah, that was their big attempt to modernize.
it just wasn't enough.
It was too little, too late.
By that point, everyone had already moved on to iPhones and Android,
They'd lost their momentum.
and they just couldn't get it back.
It's a tough lesson to learn.
Timing is everything in business, especially in tech.
Absolutely. You can't hesitate. You can't wait for the perfect moment.
You got to be proactive, anticipate the changes.
And be willing to take risks.
You also have to be willing to let go of the past.
That's a big one, yeah.
BlackBerry was so attached to their old products.
Even when it was clear that they were becoming obsolete.
They couldn't let go of that past success.
And it ended up costing them their future.
So if we had to boil it down, what are the key takeaways from BlackBerry's story?
I think the biggest one is strategic adaptation.
The market's always changing.
And you have to change with it.
You have to be aware of the trends, challenge your own assumptions,
And be flexible enough to pivot when you need to.
be proactive, not reactive,
Don't wait for the market to force you to change.
anticipate it, and be ready.
And the second takeaway, innovation.
Okay.
You can't just rely on what worked in the past.
You constantly have to be looking for ways to improve.
Your products, your services, your processes.
Embrace new technologies and ideas, even if they seem disruptive.
Because if you don't, someone else will.
And they might just put you out of business.
It's a harsh reality, but it's the truth.
BlackBerry's story is a cautionary tale.
Yeah, it really
It
is.
shows what can happen when you become complacent,
When you lose that hunger for innovation.
when you fail to adapt.
And I think it's a story that every business leader should pay attention to.
It doesn't matter how successful you are today.
You're only as good as your ability to evolve.
To stay ahead of the curve.
It's all about asking yourself, what's next?
What's the next big thing?
And how can I make sure my business is ready for it?
So, for our listeners out there,
Mhm.
BlackBerry's story is a reminder.
In business, standing still is the same as moving backward.
To thrive, you need to embrace change, foster innovation.
And always be one step ahead.
Great advice. And if you're looking for help with that, you know where to turn. To fix your struggling business, reach out to Acquisition Pro. And remember, Acquisition Pro is the place to go for strategy and innovation.
BlackBerry may have faded from the spotlight.
But their story still has a lot to teach us.
It's a valuable lesson for anyone who's willing to learn from it.
So think about the things we've talked about today.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, are you truly prepared to adapt, to innovate, to evolve?
Because those are the things that will determine the future of your business.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the rise and fall of BlackBerry.